My mother-in-law sent me refrigerated gourmet chocolates for my birthday. The next day, she called and asked, "How are the chocolates?" I smiled and said, "My husband ate them all." There was a pause. Her voice trembled. "What? Are you serious?" And then my husband called me. The Boston summer was humid, and Emily Carter had her apartment air conditioner running at full blast while she worked. Her Macintosh screen displayed the website design for a new client. Emily was building a reputation as a freelance web designer. "Honey, there's a message from my mother," James called from the sofa in the living room. Emily involuntarily shrugged her shoulders. Communications from her mother-in-law, Margaret, often caused problems. "What does she say?" Emily asked without interrupting her work. James looked at his cell phone and answered, "She's asking if we'd like to have dinner at her place next Sunday. She wants to celebrate your birthday." Emily took a deep breath. Margaret Carter behaved politely on the surface, but there always seemed to be something hidden behind her words. After 3 years of marriage, Emily had never felt genuine warmth from her mother-in-law. "I'll go if you want to," Emily said, looking at her husband's face. She could see how truly pleased he was. James was a financial analyst with sharp judgment at work, but when it came to family matters, he was strangely blind, especially regarding his mother. "Wonderful. Mother has started to accept you recently," James said with a smile. "She even said the other day, Emily has become a good wife." Emily returned his smile, but inside she felt doubtful. It was unusual for Margaret to say anything nice about her. In fact, since their wedding day, Margaret seemed to treat Emily as the woman who stole her son. "Is Sophie coming too?" Emily asked about her sister-in-law. "Oh, of course. She's been living at Mom's house lately," James answered casually. After graduating from college, Sophie had held several jobs that didn't last long and eventually returned to her mother's home. Emily couldn't ignore the coldness in Sophie's gaze toward her. Those eyes were clearly filled with jealousy. "All right," Emily said with a sigh. "Should we bring anything?" "No, Mom says she'll prepare everything." "Oh, and she mentioned she's preparing a special present for you." James's voice sounded pleased. Emily forced a smile. A special present from Margaret meant a sweater 3 sizes too small last Christmas. The Easter before that, it was a cake full of nuts that Emily was allergic to. They were all things Margaret could easily excuse with, "I didn't know." In the evening, as Emily was preparing dinner in the kitchen, James came up behind and embraced her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. "Your mother?" she answered honestly, and James's expression clouded. "Are we starting this again, Emily?" "Mom just wants to get along with you." Emily stopped herself from arguing back. This conversation had been repeated many times. James never tried to see behind his mother's words and actions. For him, Margaret was the perfect mother, and if there were any problems, they must be on Emily's side. "I'm sorry," Emily said. "I'm just tired." James kissed her to show forgiveness, but a small dissatisfaction remained in his eyes. During these 3 years, the tension in Emily and James's relationship had gradually increased. At the beginning of their marriage, James had acted protectively toward Emily, keeping distance from the excessive interference of his mother and sister. However, as time passed, he was gradually pulled back into the vortex of his original family. When the weekend came, Emily met with her friend Laura at a cafe while James was out golfing with friends. "You're going to your mother-in-law's house again?" Laura asked with surprise. "Last time, didn't she say something like, 'There's too much salt in your cooking, I'm worried about James's health?'" "Yes." Emily smiled bitterly, "but I understand that James values his relationship with his mother. Family means everything to him." "Aren't you his family?" Laura frowned. "James doesn't say anything when Margaret and Sophie always look down on you." Emily stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "He doesn't notice. In his eyes, his mother is perfect." Laura took her friend's hand. "Be careful." "I don't think Margaret truly accepts you." Emily nodded. She felt the same way. During each visit, she sensed Margaret's subtle sarcasm and Sophie's cold stares. Still, she loved James and had to endure it for his sake. The day before her birthday, James kissed Emily and promised, "Tomorrow will be a wonderful day." As Emily lay in bed, she hoped it would be true, yet somewhere in her heart, she sensed that tomorrow's visit would create new tension. When she closed her eyes, Margaret's false smile and the true feelings hidden behind it appeared. The accumulation of small insults and intentional disregard over 3 years had created an indelible anxiety within Emily. Emily's birthday morning began with a clear blue sky. While preparing breakfast, the intercom rang. "Delivery for you, refrigerated package." Emily went to the door and received a package from the delivery person. Looking at the sender's name, she saw Margaret Carter. She was a bit surprised by the unexpected gift. "James, something arrived from your mother." James, coming out of the bathroom while drying his hair, looked at the package with interest. "It must be a birthday present. Let's open it." Emily carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was an elegant black box with Chateau Chocolatier written in gold letters. It was the name of Boston's most luxurious chocolate shop. "Wow, Mom's being generous. These chocolates cost over $100 a box," James said, impressed. Inside the box, various shapes of chocolates were beautifully arranged with a small card attached. Emily picked it up and read, "Specially selected just for you." The handwriting was Margaret's meticulous script. "See," James said happily, "Mom has finally accepted you, sending such expensive chocolates." Emily smiled but felt uneasy deep inside. She couldn't believe Margaret would suddenly change her attitude. However, seeing James's happy face, she couldn't voice her doubts. "That's very thoughtful. I'll enjoy them later." All day, Emily immersed herself in her web design work. In the evening, James came home early and stood in the kitchen to prepare a special birthday dinner. Emily sat on the sofa in the living room, relieving the day's fatigue. "Dinner is ready," James called out. The meal proceeded in a pleasant atmosphere. James opened wine and offered a toast to celebrate Emily's birthday. "Happy birthday, my love. I'll be with you forever." After the meal, while James was cleaning up the kitchen, he found the chocolate box. "How about some dessert?" He opened the box and picked one up. "This looks delicious." Emily was tired. "I'm a bit full now. I'll have some tomorrow. Just one won't hurt, right?" James had already put the chocolate in his mouth. "Wow, this is really delicious." Emily smiled and said, "I'll look forward to trying them tomorrow." "Just one more." James took another. Emily didn't mind and went to take a shower. Exhausted, Emily went to bed early and quickly fell asleep. James was watching TV in the living room, unconsciously eating one chocolate after another. The next morning, when Emily woke up, James was already awake. When she went to the kitchen, he was drinking coffee and reading something. "Good morning, birthday girl." "That ended yesterday," Emily said with a laugh. "I think I'll try those chocolates now." When she went to the living room, she found the empty chocolate box on the table. "James, did you eat them all?" James nodded apologetically. "Sorry, before I knew it, I'd eaten them all." They were really delicious. Emily felt a little disappointed, but it wasn't a big deal. "Well, that's okay. You can buy me more sometime." Just then, the phone rang. The screen displayed Margaret Carter. "Oh, it's your mother." Emily answered the phone. "Hello, Margaret." "Amy. Good morning." Margaret's voice sounded brighter than usual. "Yesterday was your birthday." "Congratulations." "Thank you. And the chocolates arrived." "Oh, good," Margaret said happily. "How did the chocolates taste?" "I chose something special," Emily answered with a laugh. "Well," James ate them all. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Emily heard Margaret's voice tremble. "Are you serious?" That tone made Emily suspicious. Margaret's reaction seemed to contain something more serious than mere surprise. "Yes, he ate them all last night, but he said they were delicious." "I see." Margaret's voice was unexpected. The conversation ended awkwardly, and right after Emily hung up, James's cell phone rang. James looked a bit unwell but answered the phone. A few minutes later, he returned to the living room. His face was pale and sweat was streaming from his forehead. Emily, I got a call from the hospital. I need to go right away. Feeling sick. Before finishing his sentence, James rushed to the bathroom and began vomiting violently. With a trembling voice, he said, "Call an ambulance." Emily hurriedly called 911. Meanwhile, James's condition rapidly deteriorated. When she touched his forehead, she felt an abnormal heat. "It's okay, James. The ambulance will be here soon." As the ambulance siren began to sound, James's cell phone rang again. Emily saw it displayed Mom. She didn't answer. A strange premonition was spreading in her chest. The siren sound approached, and Emily left the apartment door wide open. The paramedics quickly entered the room and checked James's condition as he lay in the bathroom. "He's showing severe dehydration. He needs in the fourth immediately," one paramedic said. "How long has he been showing symptoms?" "He looked a bit pale when he woke up, but suddenly got much worse," Emily answered with a trembling voice. "Last night, he didn't." Then she remembered the chocolates from her mother-in-law. James was placed on a stretcher, and Emily rode in the ambulance. In the swaying vehicle, she held James's hand tightly. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead and his face had turned gray. "It's okay, James. We'll be at the hospital soon." When the ambulance arrived at the hospital, James was immediately taken to the treatment room. Emily remained in the waiting room, filling out necessary paperwork. Taking out her cell phone, she saw 5 missed calls from Margaret. Just then, the phone rang again. "Hello, Margaret. Emily, where is James?" "Why isn't he answering his phone?" Margaret's voice was nearly hysterical. "He's in the hospital." He suddenly became very ill. "Which hospital?" "I'm coming right now." Emily told her the hospital name and hung up. She was overcome with a strange feeling. Why was Margaret so panicked, and why did this happen after the chocolate conversation? 30 minutes later, Margaret and Sophie arrived at the hospital. Both looked distraught, especially Margaret, whose face showed terror. "Where is he?" "Where is my son?" Margaret confronted the receptionist. Emily stood up and approached them. "They're treating him." "I'm waiting for the doctor to come out." When Margaret saw Emily, she flinched for a moment. "What happened?" "Why suddenly, I don't know. He was already feeling unwell when he woke up," Emily said, and after a slight pause added, "After eating your chocolates." The color drained from Margaret and Sophie's faces at these words. They exchanged glances and Sophie bit her lip. "Chocolates?" Margaret lowered her voice. "He ate all of them?" Emily observed their reactions. "Yes, all of them last night. He wasn't feeling well by morning." At this moment, a doctor appeared in the waiting room. "Miss S. Carter, we have the initial test results for your husband." The 3 gathered around the doctor. "He's showing symptoms of severe food poisoning. There's a stronger reaction than usual food poisoning bacteria, so we're conducting additional tests." "Did he eat anything unusual?" Emily remembered the empty chocolate box. "He ate expensive chocolates last night. The box is at home." The doctor frowned. "Could you bring that packaging?" "It might be necessary for testing." "I'll get it," Sophie suddenly volunteered. "Tell me your apartment address." Emily, though suspicious, gave her the address. Sophie quickly left the hospital. "Doctor?" Margaret turned to the doctor. "Is my son going to be all right? We're administering an antidote now, just in case, because the tests are showing some toxin reaction." "Toxin?" Emily's voice rose. "What do you mean?" The doctor chose his words carefully. "We can't be certain yet. However, from the symptoms and initial test results, we believe this isn't ordinary food poisoning." Margaret collapsed into a chair. "No way." 2 hours later, Sophie returned. She wasn't carrying the chocolate box. "I couldn't find it," she said. "Maybe it was thrown in the trash." Emily frowned. "It should have been on the living room table." At this point, a man identifying himself as a detective arrived at the hospital. "Miss S. Carter, I'd like to ask you some questions." "Police?" Margaret's voice trembled. "Why?" "Specific toxins were detected in James Carter's body. We need to investigate the situation." Emily touched her cheek with a trembling hand. Toxins? Surely not. The detective continued, taking notes and asking questions. Have you consumed any special food or drink recently? Last night, expensive chocolates arrived from my mother-in-law, and my husband ate them all, Emily answered. The detective's eyes turned to Margaret. Where did you purchase these chocolates? Margaret's face turned pale. Chateau Chocolatier, but this is a misunderstanding. Is there any packaging or remaining chocolates? Emily shook her head. My sister-in-law went to get them, but she said she couldn't find them. The detective looked at Sophie. You really couldn't find them? Sophie sat uneasily in her chair. No, they weren't there. After carefully observing the two, the detective said, as a precaution, we'll need to investigate the apartment. Emily nodded and handed over the keys. Then she headed to the treatment room to check on James. He was lying weakly, receiving fluids. Emily, he said with dry lips, what happened? We don't know yet, but you'll get better. Don't worry. Under the nurse's watch, Emily stepped into the hallway. As she was about to go to the restroom, passing by a private room, she heard a small voice. Mom, the plan is ruined. It was Sophie's voice. Be quiet. She might hear us. Margaret's voice was low and angry. Emily stopped and pressed herself against the wall. What's going to happen to us if the police investigate? There's no evidence. You disposed of the box, right? Yes, but be quiet. Just pretend you know nothing. James will recover. The amount wasn't enough. Emily's chest felt ice cold. She moved away from the spot and returned to the waiting room on shaky legs. The horrifying truth of what Margaret and Sophie had tried to do was becoming clear. When the detective returned to the hospital, his expression was stern. We've recovered the chocolate box from the trash can. It's been sent to the lab. Emily looked at Margaret and Sophie, the color of fear spread across their faces. We also found a box from a location other than your apartment's trash can, Miss Sophie Carter, from the trunk of your car. Sophie tried to stand up from her chair, but another officer placed a hand on her shoulder. Margaret Carter and Sophie Carter, I'm detaining you for questioning on suspicion of attempted murder. Emily stood stunned. She couldn't accept the reality that her mother-in-law and sister-in-law had tried to poison James or, more likely, originally intended to poison her. Why? She asked in a faint voice. Margaret looked at Emily with cold eyes. We won't give James to someone like you. That boy is our family. The hospital corridor was cold, and Emily sat in a plastic chair, clutching a coffee cup with trembling hands. Several hours had passed since Margaret and Sophie were taken away by the police. James was sleeping in the intensive care unit, and the doctors had informed her that his condition was stable. The dangerous period seemed to have passed. Emily closed her tired eyes and recalled past events. Since her marriage, she had experienced numerous unexplained illnesses. She often felt headaches or nausea, especially after visiting her mother-in-law's house. At the time, she thought it was just stress, but now a different possibility emerged. Her cell phone rang, displaying Laura on the screen. Emily, are you okay? I saw on the news that your husband was rushed to the hospital because of poisoning. Emily explained the situation to Laura. Laura worked at a law firm and was a friend who could calmly respond to such situations. What are the police saying? Laura asked. They're questioning Margaret and Sophie on suspicion of attempted murder. Apparently, traces of arsenic were detected in the chocolates. A sharp intake of breath could be heard from Laura on the other end of the line. Emily, this is really serious. I'm coming over right now. Until then, don't talk to anyone. An hour later, Laura arrived at the hospital. She began analyzing Emily's situation with professional eyes. Think back to past events, Laura said quietly. Has Margaret ever offered you food or drink, especially just to you? Emily thought hard. Now that you mention it, at the party after our wedding, she brought special wine and poured it only in my glass. Afterward, I became terribly ill and couldn't even participate in the wedding photo session. And then, at Christmas, she gave me special cookies just for me. After eating them, I was bedridden for 3 days, but I thought it was food poisoning. Laura was recording in her notebook. Anything else? Any potential evidence? I don't know. But 2 weeks before James was hospitalized, his work insurance changed. He said he had enrolled in a better life insurance policy. Laura's face tightened. Who are the beneficiaries? Me and James's mother, I think, he said. If anything happens, both of you will be secure. Laura stood up. Emily, this is clearly premeditated. You need to tell the police everything. That night, Emily told the detective all her suspicions. The detective nodded as he listened and promised. We'll investigate. A week later, James was allowed to be discharged. He had lost weight and still looked unwell, but thanks to strong medication, he had somehow recovered. Emily took him home and quietly nursed him. Why would Mom do such a thing? James had mumbled repeatedly. He seemed unable to accept the truth. Margaret and Sophie had been temporarily released on bail. They had tried to contact James, but Emily had blocked all calls. James's recovery was her top priority. 3 days after discharge, Emily made a decision. She needed to tell her husband the truth. When James was lying on the sofa, she sat next to him. James, we need to go to your mother's house. He looked at her with surprised eyes. Why? To find evidence. You know this wasn't the first time, don't you? James silently looked away. I don't know that Mom would really do such a thing. Trust me. Emily took her husband's hand. For our future, we need to know the truth. The next day, though James was still weak, he agreed to go to Margaret's house with Emily. They chose a time when Margaret and Sophie would be at the lawyer's office, preparing for the trial. James had a spare key. What should we look for? James asked while standing at the entrance. Anything unusual. Especially check your mother's bedroom and desk. They quietly entered the house. Margaret's house, which they hadn't visited in a while, was as orderly as always. Emily went up the stairs from the living room to Margaret's bedroom. James followed her, though hesitantly. It feels like we're invading Mom's privacy. James, your mother tried to kill me. Emily's voice was cold. Margaret's bedroom was elegantly decorated, with family photos arranged on the bedside table. Emily opened the closet and began searching the upper shelves. She found nothing. Let's check the desk. Margaret's desk was locked, but James managed to pry open the drawers. Inside, various documents were neatly arranged. Emily quickly checked the documents and stopped at one file. This is it. It was a copy of James's new life insurance contract. The beneficiaries were indeed Emily and Margaret, but there was a small mark next to Emily's name. A separate note read, "To be changed." Searching deeper, they found another shocking document. It was Emily's own life insurance policy. Emily had no memory of when James had contracted this insurance, and the beneficiaries were Margaret and Sophie. This is my life insurance. When did you contract this? James looked at the document with a pale face. I don't know. Mom said she would arrange everything. Emily covered her face with trembling hands. They had been planning from the beginning. From under the dresser, Emily found a small box. Inside were photos of her with needles stuck in them. Furthermore, various herbs and powders were stored in small bottles with labels. James, look at this. Emily opened the laptop in the corner of the desk. It was password protected, but James tried his mother's commonly used password, and the screen opened. The browser history included searches for undetectable poisons, slow poisoning methods, and complete guide to life insurance fraud. James sat down in a chair and held his head. I can't believe it. Why would Mom? Suddenly they heard the door open. They turned around in surprise. What are you doing? Sophie was standing at the bedroom door. Seeing them, her face changed color. You have no right to enter, Emily answered calmly. We're keeping all of this as evidence that you and your mother tried to kill me. Don't be ridiculous. Sophie couldn't hide her weariness. There's no evidence. James slowly stood up. Sophie, why? Why would you and Mom? Sophie's expression changed. Why? Because everything changed after you married this woman, our plans, our future. What do you mean? Sophie laughed, her laughter mixed with sadness and hatred. Mom never intended to accept you as family. From the beginning, her target was James's property and your insurance money. Emily picked up the documents and showed them to James. Look, your mother has taken out large loans in your name. They were in financial trouble. James was speechless. Then, with a voice mixing anger and sadness, he said, "Get out, Sophie. I never want to see you again. James, you have to choose your family, this woman, or us, people who tried to kill my wife, our family." James's voice was trembling. "Get out before I call the police." Emily stood beside James and held his hand. They silently stared at Sophie. "This isn't over," Sophie said threateningly as she left the room. At that moment, James's cell phone rang. He answered the call and, after talking for a few minutes, looked at Emily with a changed expression. Mom has confessed everything. Autumn sunlight poured down on the marble steps of the courthouse. Emily and James held hands as they left the building. The final verdict had been pronounced, ending the long and painful trial process. Margaret Carter received a 5-year prison sentence for assault and conspiracy, the crime of deliberately preparing poison and repeatedly endangering Emily was severe. Sophie, on the other hand, admitted her guilt as an accomplice and received a 3-year suspended sentence. Her lawyer's argument that she had acted under her mother's influence was accepted. "It's over," Emily said, exhaling deeply. James pulled her shoulder close. "Yes, we can finally move forward." Getting into the car, James began driving toward the suburbs. They had decided to establish a new home in a small town in Connecticut, away from Boston. It was a fitting place for a new beginning. When they visited Margaret on visiting day, she had completely changed. Her former dignity was gone, and she was isolated from other inmates, mentally cornered. She momentarily brightened at seeing James, but his cold gaze made her fall silent again. She uttered words of apology to Emily, but her eyes showed no genuine regret. A letter of apology arrived from Sophie. It said, "I want to look at my own life, free from others' control." Emily read the letter but didn't write back. Forgiveness would take time, perhaps she would never be able to forgive. Upon arriving at their new house, they carried in their belongings. The small but bright house symbolized their new life. "What do we do now?" James asked, sitting down in the living room. Emily smiled and sat beside him. "First, I want to think about the interior design of this house. Then get my web design company on track. I need to find a new workplace too," James said. He had quit his financial company in Boston and applied to a small local company. The salary would be lower, but he was seeking a less stressful environment. That night, Emily shared surprising news with James. "We're going to be a family of 3. James's eyes shone with joy. "Really?" "When? In 6 months. I confirmed it with a test." He embraced his wife, contemplating that small life. Their future life would not be easy, however. They had overcome difficulties to get this far. Life with their new family was sure to be filled with a different kind of happiness. Lying in bed, Emily held James's hand. "I'm so glad I met you. Not eating those chocolates was the most fortunate decision of my life." James laughed quietly and kissed his wife's forehead. "Thanks to me eating them all, we discovered the truth." In the gentle moonlight illuminating the room, the two contemplated the future they would walk with their new life. It was the beginning of quiet happiness at the end of hardship.